In this video, I'm going to share with you 3 quotes that if you can internalize them, if you can understand them and apply them, you can continuously transform, elevate your life, your identity, your decision-making. You can also make very powerful and discerning decisions in the sea of choices. Dr. Barry Schwartz actually wrote a book called The Paradox of Choice. And as people, one of the most difficult aspects of life is making decisions when there's a sea of competing options. And especially when there are really good options and you've got to choose the good against the good, or you've got to let go of the good so that you can ultimately become great. So these 3 quotes are going to give you some really good insight into how you can set a really powerful vision for your identity and for yourself, your future self, as well as how you can sift and screen and make much better decisions, and then ultimately how you can go all in on the thing that you most want and desire and let go of everything else. The first quote comes from Terrell and Fiona Givens. Our lives are more like a canvas on which we paint than a script we are to learn, though the illusion of the latter appeals to us due to its lower risk. It is easier to learn a part than to create a work of art. So this has a lot to do with choice. This has a lot to do with agency and who you are as a person. And basically what they're saying is that our lives are actually more like a canvas in which we create than a script we are to learn. But it's a lot less risky to think that we're just here to learn a script, to fulfill a role, rather than actually creating a work of art. And so this had a lot to do with who you become, with the life you live, with the future self you create, rather than trying to discover it, rather than trying to seek it. The harder truth is that you are the one to create it. You are the one who's going to create your life. You're also the one who's going to create your narrative, your vision of your life and the choices you make, as well as even you're the one who's going to view and create your past. I wrote the book, Be Your Future Self Now. And obviously a big question is, well, how do we actually figure out who our future self is? The challenging part is that you've got to choose it. You've got to actually create that canvas. Albert Einstein said imagination is more important than knowledge. And so my invitation to you on this is to actually give yourself the space. That is something that's going to be emphasized, especially on the 3rd quote. But in order to actually get clear on your vision, in order to actually think through who do you want your future self to be, what do you want, you've got to give yourself space. You got to give yourself the space to actually think about it rather than needing to be busy, rather than quickly coming to an answer. Another really important point with this is that from a psychology standpoint, the past, the present, and future are all existing simultaneously. Right now, you have a view of your past, it's your memories, and that's something that you're constantly creating and recreating. But the second one is also your future. Your future is like the draft. It's something that you're always creating, reimagining, recreating, and so you don't want to get overly fixed or dogmatic about it. I like to think about it as your future as well as your past are simply like drafts, and they're under constant revision. So you have one iteration of it, and you can come up with a new and better iteration of it in a week, in a month, in a year. Another really great way of looking at it is that the past and the future are simply tools. The past is a tool for better operating in the present. Even if you go through powerful, painful traumas and negative experiences, you can frame it and learn from it such that it happened for you, not to you. And so you can use your past as a tool rather than overly making it real. I like that concept in psychology about never reify. Don't make something real that's just a concept. The past, even your views of it, is a concept. I'm talking about memory, your views of things. So use it as a tool. The past is a tool for better operating in the present. The future, similarly, is a tool for better operating in the present. That is part of the reason I wrote this book with Dan Sullivan, 10x is easier than 2x. One of the things that we explain in this book is that when you're thinking about 10x goals, they are more useful than 2x goals, because 10x goals, most pathways won't get you there. And so when you set a seemingly impossible vision, almost everything you're doing, it goes into that 80% of things using the 80-20 principle. And so the future is simply a tool for better navigating the present. I love the quote from Dan Sullivan. He said that the only way to make your present better is by making your future bigger. Another great quote is that the bigger the vision, the better the decisions. And so the future is simply a tool. Don't make it real. Don't obsess about it. One of the things that happens when I coach individuals or leaders is sometimes they'll have some vision. It's like a 7-year vision for their future, 7, 10 years out, their BHAG, their big, hairy, audacious goal. And they've got some arbitrary timeline on it. For example, a company that I may be coaching is doing a couple $100 million in revenue and they want to get to $1 billion. And they're like, well, we can do this in about 10 years. And I ask them, why 10 years? That's arbitrary. That future isn't actually real. Don't reify it. Remember, the future is a tool. So let's reestablish, flexibly change, filter, and adjust that future so that it's a better decision-making tool in the present. The past and the future are tools for better operating in the present. All of them exist simultaneously now. But the main thing I'm trying to get you to think about here is, what is that future? Again, Albert Einstein said imagination is more important than knowledge. Don't get overly fixated or rigid about what that future can be. It's a canvas on which you create. And yes, it is harder to create a work of art than to simply memorize a script. But what the invitation for you is to actually create that work of art. And what I want you to think about is really give yourself the space and the time to draft and redraft that future and get really honest with yourself. Honest about what the future is that would be the most powerful to start living out now. I love the concept that you want to be, then do, then have. And as you get more and more connected to your vision of your future self, which is deeply personal and between you, yourself, God, and ultimately most other people, their opinion of it very little matters. I mean, certainly, obviously, your spouse, if you're married, is going to have massive say, and that's ultimately a collaboration. But when you're thinking about your future self, rather than imposing limits on what you can be, do, and have, rather than imposing limits on yourself, on what God can do with you, it's much more powerful to be really honest with yourself and not use external people as your benchmarks or the opinions of others as your benchmarks. Instead, really think about the vision that would excite you, the vision that you most esteem, what you most value based on where you're at right now. And it's okay if it's massively different, quantum leaps different from your current life. It's okay if most people would think it's impossible. It's okay if most people don't see that in you. I remember when I grew up a young man, barely ended up graduating high school. I had an uncle of mine tell me a couple of years back, and this was when I was, home from a church mission, and I was on my path to becoming a professor, actually. He said, Ben, if I was a betting man, I would have bet against you back when you were in high school because things were not going well for me. I was not on a good path. I was playing video games all day. I was not in the best environments. And so the main point here is that outside people, they don't have any clue or any glimpse on your future self. And so certainly you can have mentors, you can have guides and stuff, but at the end of the day, you've got to make the choice. No one can choose for you. Also, no one can see the future self you have, but using the future as a tool and that massive higher goals force a lot more honesty and a lot more clarity and bolder strategic moves. You've got to be the one to decide the future self that you want to commit to, and there is no failure. Like, this is one of the things that I think people get really wrong, is that they don't, imagine or set big visions because they think that they're a failure if they don't hit it. There honestly is no failure. Like, this is between you and you. You're just learning and growing and developing and applying. And so there is no failure. It's just you living and learning and working and trying. The main thing for you to consider is, where is your attention focused? Whatever you focus on expands. You are, in a large part, becoming what you're shooting for. And so you can shoot for a small or a linear goal, and whatever you focus on, you're going to become more of that. Or you can focus on something that's deeply exciting, deeply personal, that, may seem impossible, may seem like a long shot. Who cares? But if you're focusing on that, and if you're thinking about it, you will adapt and become largely what you focus on, especially if you're willing to go through that process. Psychologists call it deliberate practice, that when you go for a massive goal, yes, the growth curve is going to be steep, but that's between you and you. And most of growth and most of learning ultimately comes down to emotions. The emotions of being willing to try, fail, learn, adjust. Also, the willingness to be wrong, to let go of old views that are no longer relevant. But, it's up to you, for example, what your life is going to look like over the next 12 months, 36 months, 10 years. Like, what happens in the level of transformation between that time is largely up to you and what you decide. Yes, there are outside factors. Yes, there are things you can't control. But what you can control, as Viktor Frankl said, is your attitude, is your views. And Frankl himself, who went through the concentration camps, very much said that what people need is not a tensionless state, but rather the striving and struggling for a worthwhile goal, a freely chosen task. That was his main insight. And that's a large part of the insight that I discuss in this book right here, Be Your Future Self Now, is that as human beings, we need a future. We need a purpose. Without purpose, people perish. So what I'm inviting you to think about from the perspective of a canvas is, what would you choose? A freely chosen goal, a freely chosen task to be anxiously engaged in a good cause. Obviously, you can seek inspiration from a higher power, but I invite you to get in your journal and to give yourself the space and to think about, what would be the most worthwhile and meaningful thing for me to pursue? Oh, it's okay if you change your mind on that in the future with better perspective, maybe with some hardship or other things you might learn and readjust. That's okay. But based on your current understanding, what is the absolute highest thing, most valuable thing that you can pursue, even if it seems impossible? By pursuing that, that changes who you are and how you do things. By pursuing that higher and nobler goal, you will be required to let go of many things that no longer matter. So that takes us now to quote number 2. Quote number 2 comes from Poor Charlie's Almanac. Charlie's exhaustive screening process requires considerable self-discipline and results in long periods of apparent inactivity. Charlie generally focuses first on what to avoid, that is, on what not to do, before he considers the affirmative steps he will take in a given situation. There is so much packed into this. I first love the idea that his self-discipline requires long periods of apparent inactivity. This is, again, back to the idea of space, giving yourself the space to think. Once you start getting clearer and clearer on the vision, on the goal that you're going to actually target your attention towards, then you've got to give yourself a lot of space to think, to screen, to ponder. And in our current culture, there is such a focus on busyness, on grinding, on working, that ultimately is the hamster wheel. That's the treadmill. That's being busy but not productive. Being productive is ultimately about making desired, fruitful, powerful progress. And that progress often requires sitting, thinking, and considering. And I love the second part of his quote, which is the idea that the biggest thing you do, honestly, is laying away certain things that don't matter. It's about screening out, filtering out, letting go, and ensuring that you're not dedicating your time and energy on things that no longer matter. The higher and higher your vision, the better your decisions, and the higher your vision, the less options you have. That's the whole point of 10x is easier than 2x, is that for 10x goals, there are far less options on getting there. One of the examples I give in that book is my son Caleb. My son Caleb is a high school tennis player, and he really wants to play college tennis. Well, his own coach, his tennis coach, said, why isn't your goal to go pro? And Caleb didn't really know. The main point with this example is, if Caleb actually did want to go pro, we would have to be a lot more discerning in every aspect of his tennis game. Chances are, if he really wants to go pro, there are a lot less options on how he could get there. There's maybe a few coaches that could likely get him there. Whereas if he wants to go to college, there's almost infinite options. Like, he could play on the high school team. There's probably hundreds or dozens of coaches that could get him to the college level. But with a higher goal, there are less possible pathways of getting there, which again is a useful tool. Using a higher goal as the tool and the filtering process for the pathways and the process, it invites a lot stricter pathways and process. And there are far less pathways to getting to a higher goal, which makes it really useful. And so using Charlie's quote, going for really high goals and then using those goals as a really intense filter, almost everything gets rejected. That's one of the things as well that Nassim Taleb talks about in Anti-Fragile. He actually says, and this is something I think is interesting, he says, and he's speaking in terms of morals, but he's also talking in terms of decisions. He says that 90% of being good ultimately comes down to avoiding the bad. The first step, once you've started to envision your goal or where you want to go, is to start to screen out, filter out, and let go of the things in your life which contradict, but also creating a process, a system to filter out so that you're no longer distracted by the myriad of options that are simply a distraction. I love the quote that you cannot underestimate the unimportance of practically everything. Almost everything is noise. And so that includes everything on the internet, that includes everything you read, that includes even people. Almost everything is noise. And it's about actually developing a really clear and fine filter. In psychology, we call that selective attention. But you want a high filter to filter most things out so that you're not caught and tossed to and fro with confusion. Also, you really don't want to go below the floor, right? When you set a really high vision and standard and floor, if you keep going below that standard and you keep entertaining options that are below where you're trying to go, then you're going to create identity confusion. If you're a leader who keeps going below, what you're trying to go for, then you create massive cultural confusion with your team. And so it's really powerful to set a massive high floor and standard, and then to honestly start saying no to almost everything, and then to tune your filters, your selective attention, for the few things which absolutely matter, those few pathways, those few people that can go 10x, right? That can go to the next level. All right, this takes us to the third and final quote. It comes from Robert Brault. We are kept from our goal not by obstacles, but by a clear path to a lesser goal. There is so much in this, but I'm going to break it down a little bit. So as you start setting a big vision, as you get really honest with who you want to be, what you want to do, what you value, the hardest part, and this fits exactly with what Charlie Munger was talking about, The hardest part is actually committing fully to what you most want rather than succumbing to all of the options, all the lesser goals. And those lesser goals could be a job, they could be awesome opportunities. The more successful you become, the more options you have. And you really want to have a vision and a filter that blocks out most of those opportunities. Yes, you still want to create space to explore and to open yourself up, but most things are lesser goals. And a lesser goal is definitely more secure. It's more predictable. It may create more security, but it's ultimately not what you truly want. And you'll know it's a lesser goal because you know you're kind of selling yourself short. On a daily basis, for example, you may want to wake up and dip into or focus on your creative work, but then you start scrolling social media, texting. The lesser goal is anything that's stopping you from what you most want to do truly at your core. And on a practical level, when it comes to your vision, and I'm talking to myself here too, there may be something you truly want to do. Call it that idea of the canvas, your future self, but you might not fully believe it. That goes to that quote from Napoleon Hill that whatever the mind can conceive and believe, it can achieve. So back to the quote from Robert Brault, we're kept from our goal not by obstacles, but by a clear path to a lesser goal. It's not the obstacles that are stopping you. Actually, those obstacles between you and your goal, learning how to overcome those, learn through them, that's how you transform into your future self. It's not the obstacles that stop you ultimately. It's the clear path to a lesser goal. You end up choosing a lesser option than you really wanted because it's convenient, because it's easy, because it may be lucrative. I'm right now faced with many situations where I can choose a lesser goal, which is awesome in the short run, but it may actually stop me from my true goal. And it takes deep commitment and courage. And so I guess the final point here I'll make is that as you actually apply what Charles Munger said, and you start letting go of things first. He said he first focuses on what to avoid rather than what to actually do. And one of the things that I have found applying the thinking in 10x is easier than 2x is that as you have a 10x vision and as you start stripping away the 80%, you end up creating a lot of space. You create a lot of white space where you honestly have a lot of time in your calendar. Me right now, I have done a lot of things where I've stripped away the 80%. I've let go of a lot of things. I've let even go of a lot of my team. I transitioned to my coaching program off to my mentor. I'm now in a place where, honestly, I'm in a space and a place where I've got space for years. I've got a year, 2, 3 years where I don't have to do anything. The problem is that once we create that space, we have anxiety. I love the quote that anxiety is the dizziness of freedom. Often, if you're used to being busy and you've kind of rewarded yourself for always doing stuff, it can be very difficult to create that space, going from quantitative time to qualitative time. Qualitative time is deep time. And that time is where you can make the quantum leaps in your identity, in your vision, in your strategy. You can start to align and connect with the right people, but you won't do that if you don't give yourself the space to not quickly jump into some lesser goal, because a lot of lesser goals are going to present themselves to you. A lot of lesser goals are presenting themselves to me, interesting opportunities, and a big part of me wants to busy myself rather than keeping that space, creating that space, slowing time down, not needing to give my attention to something because I'm too scared or uneasy to go through those mental and emotional obstacles. That is a huge part of learning and mastery. Instead of developing the learning and mastery, emotionally we get anxiety, and so we jump into some lesser goal, which is what Dan Sullivan and I would call being 2x. Strip things away and ultimately give yourself the space to really work through, get clear on where you want to go deep. You can't get that clarity. You can't develop that mastery until after you focused on what you avoid. That is the whole idea of Charlie Munger. And that is something I actually studied during my master's, was this idea of a point of no return. You can't actually fully know what to do until after the point of no return. It's after you let go of the distractions of the lesser goals. And people want to have the answer first. This actually fits with Dan Sullivan's 4C's formula, that first you have to commit, then that commitment leads to courage, and ultimately through the courage, you develop that capability and confidence. Those are Dan's 4C's. What we find over and over is that people want the confidence first. They want the answer first. And what I'm saying to you is you can't have that answer first. You have the canvas, the vision, and it's a draft, it's a tool, and it's something to continually connect to at higher and higher levels. And then ultimately, you've got to be really honest about what gets filtered out, what to avoid, what no longer fits. And it's not until after you start uncommitting and letting things go and creating that space, and also the vulnerability, the exposure of letting things go and quitting things and stopping things is how you prove your commitment to the vision. And it's only after you've done that that you can get the clarity. Only after that you can start to truly go deep and develop where to go. And you'll do it with a lot more conviction and confidence because you've gone through the process of letting go of a lesser goal. And by letting go of those lesser goals, by stripping those things out and by saying, no, I'm not going to do that anymore. I'm not going to entertain that anymore. My attention is higher value. I believe that things can be more. Then in that space, and after that emotional battle of letting those things go, then and only then will the path start to become hyper clear and hyper powerful. These are 3 quotes that I love, that I keep coming back to, that I'm going to be writing about and sharing in my upcoming book, Rapid Transformation. Thank you for watching. Please like, please subscribe, please click the thumbs up. If you want to, it can really help maybe other people to see this. I'm just here to share, and I love it. And please comment and share what you thought about this and what you thought about these quotes, which one you liked the most, which one had the most impact on you. Have an amazing day. Talk to you later.